Coco Chanel, revolutionizing rights and responsibilities through women's fashion. Gabrielle Boher Chanel was born on August 19, 1882 in France. Chanel became very accomplished and not only created new fashion designs, but she freed women from the traditional ways of life that restricted them from being independent. She was the second born in a family of 5 to Albert Chanel and Jeanne de Vaux. Her family, however, was very troubled. Her mother passed away when she was 12, and her father abandoned her and her siblings shortly after. She was then separated from her brothers to go to boarding school run by nuns with her sisters. The nuns at school taught Chanel how to sew. By the time she left at age 18, she had mastered the craft. Chanel was always ashamed of her upbringing and would make up elaborate lies as to where and how she grew up. When Chanel was 20, she met Etienne Balsan at La Rotonde, where she sang. He was a very wealthy Frenchman who developed a relationship with Chanel. He then asked her to move in with him at his farm, and she accepted. Balsan also introduced Chanel to the elite class of women. Through the wealthy woman, she began to receive attention as a fashion designer for primarily hats in the beginning. The women began to wear her designs, which ended up in the tabloids. By then, Balsan allowed Chanel to open a small hat boutique on the first level of his home. Unfortunately for Balsan, Chanel found the love of her life, Arthur Boy Chappelle. Chappelle believed that if Chanel wanted to start her own business, she should. Taking Chappelle's advice, Chanel opened her first store on 21 Rue Cambon, called Chanel Mode, which Chappelle funded in 1909. As the years went on, Chappelle married another woman, but kept Chanel as a mistress. In the end, though, Chanel always loved Chappelle and said, "We were made for each other, that he was there and that he loved me, and that he knew I loved him was all that mattered." In 1915, Chappelle helped Chanel open additional shops in the towns of Deauville and Biarritz, France. It was while spending a leisurely summer with Chappelle in Deauville in 1913 that Chanel first invented her famous casual wear design. Before Chanel's designs, the wealthy women wore lavish and expensive dresses. It restrained them from moving freely and was not practical for everyday wear. Most of the time, the women could barely breathe. Opposing the uncomfortable wear, Chanel designed a jersey material outfit. Although she did not have the intention of selling the clothing she made in the beginning, she first made it for herself when she was cold. She cut some old jersey, added a ribbon, a collar, and a knot, and voila! People were complimenting her on the outfit, so Chanel volunteered to sell some. Chanel's designs were very unique since jersey material was used for men's underwear. Chanel defended her choice of cloth by stating it was low-priced and it complemented a woman's body. Chanel said, "I make fashion women can live in, breathe in, feel comfortable in, and look younger in."
Je ne sais pas si vous en rendez compte, mais vous vivez beaucoup avec votre odorat. C'est dans tous les cas, de tous les sens, celui qu'il faudrait perdre quand on vit avec des gens sales et celui qu'il voudrait avoir quand on vit avec des gens convenables. Alors je pense que le parfum, c'est le luxe, voyez-vous. Et même très léger, ça peut être un petit parfum de rien du tout, du moment qu'il est bien choisi et qu'il ressemble à la personne qui doit s'en servir.
In 1923, Chanel collaborated with Ernest Box, who specialized in making perfume because she wanted to create a new scent for women to wear. Chanel wanted to get rid of the flowery, rosewater smells of the perfumes being sold during her time. Box made several samples of perfume for Chanel to smell, and on the 5th try, Chanel loved it, and thus came the signature name Chanel No. 5. The perfume was made of 83 plus ingredients, and she called it a woman's scent. Chanel also created the bottle in which the perfume was sold in. Chanel No. 5's bottle was a simple square, which was a drastic change from the fancy over-the-top bottles of the other perfumes. Chanel wanted her perfume to be the most expensive one on the market, so she had an agreement with the perfume company to manufacture the product. Even though Chanel made a fortune off the perfume, she was convinced that she was cheated out of a large sum of money. Chanel No. 5 continued to be sold even more after Marilyn Monroe did an interview with Life magazine for her cover and talked about how she wore the perfume. Later, the House of Chanel used the interview to make a commercial for the perfume.
Marilyn Monroe. Well, you know, they ask you questions like, well, just an example, what do you wear to bed? Do you wear a pajama top, the bottoms of the pajamas, or a nightgown? Or... So I say Chanel number 5. Because it's the truth. And yet I don't want to say nude, but it's the truth.
In 1925, Chanel introduced what became known as the classic Chanel suit, a collarless cardigan jacket with tight-fitting sleeves and a braided trip, matched with a plain but elegant skirt. That was huge since nothing ever like that had been made before. Men wore suits and women wore dresses. That's how it was. Chanel making the suit showed that women could do what men can do while still keeping their feminine style. Chanel's little black dress was designed in 1926 to liberate women from their traditional nonsensical dresses. The rich women were no longer robed by their maids, so the dress allowed them to clothe themselves easier. The little black dress was shorter and had less fabric than the outdated dresses had. There was some backlash from men who did not feel comfortable allowing their wives to show that much skin. However, the dress was loved by women and therefore became very popular. The dress was also a revolution in color and style. Before, black-colored clothing was strictly worn at funerals, but now black dresses were worn whenever women wanted. Chanel started a new trend in fashion when she wore pants to social gatherings. Wearing pants as a woman during Chanel's time was unheard of. Like the stylish suit, it was a sign that women should be equal to men. In October 1939, weeks after World War II began, Chanel closed the House of Chanel and fired all her workers. The French government and her employees tried to have Chanel reopen her stores, but she refused. After the Nazis' forces took over France, Chanel became romantically involved with a young German Nazi, Hans Gunther von Dicklich. When the Nazis retreated in 1944, Chanel was questioned by French authorities about her relationship with the Nazi. She was eventually released, but her actions had ruined her public image. For the next decade, no one heard from Coco Chanel. In 1954, when Chanel was 71, she returned to the fashion world with a bang. Chanel complained that the new styles were much too constrictive and illogical. She also thought the problem started with the fact that men took over women's fashion. According to her, they did not know how to make clothing for women. The big male designers at the time were Christian Dior and Cristobal Balenciaga. February 5, 1954, Chanel launched her new line of clothes. The reviews, however, were surprisingly poor. Americans like Elizabeth Taylor, Jackie Kennedy, and Grace Kelly were some of her famous clients who continued to love Chanel's designs. The next show Chanel had in May of 1955 was a much bigger success thanks to the positive feedback from America. Chanel had reclaimed her fame and legacy. The most courageous act is still to think for yourself, aloud. Coco Chanel affected women's rights and responsibilities in many ways, but all through fashion. Chanel never mentioned wanting to change women's rights and responsibilities directly, but her impact to the fashion world said differently. Before Chanel's designs, women wore clothes that did not allow them to be independent and work for what they had. With the wardrobe the women had previously, it was obvious the men were dominant. Their outfits were frilly and uncomfortable. When Chanel came around, she completely changed the fashion world forever. Her jersey started the chain reaction of new clothing. Her signature attire was comfortable yet elegant. When women began to wear her designs, it showed the world that women had rights of their own. Chanel's clothing also changed women's responsibilities, mostly around the house. Pre-Chanel, the woman would stay home. The responsibility was making sure the children were taken care of and the house was clean, with dinner waiting for their husband when he came home from work. Well, post-Chanel, a woman's responsibility expanded into providing for the family as well. Chanel's designs inspired women to stand up for themselves and showed men that women have a say in what they do. When Chanel died on January 10, 1971, her designs did not die with her. Her clothing kept on being made and her riches continued to grow. Even today, over 40 years after she died, almost everybody knows who Coco Chanel was and what a huge impact she had on the fashion world. Do you know who Coco Chanel is?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I have one of her purses. Yes, I know of Coco Chanel. Yes, I have her perfume.
I think I've seen her stories in New York.